Appreciation post for Native American and First Nation Queens. Indigenous Excellence. Stacy Layne Matthews, Adore Delano, Trixie Mattel, Shuga Cain, Evie Oddly, Ilona Verley. Is that really it? Why is the song getting louder? No, stop! RuPaul's Drag Race is a reality competition show, if you did not know, that started airing over 13 years ago. It's a US TV show that has since had one all-returning spin-off and a Canada spin-off in North America. Next to it, of course, there have been a couple of other spin-offs that are not tied to the North American continent. So for the topic of this video, we're not going to be talking about those unless in passing. That means that the North American part of the show has 3 different shows under its belt. Though, if we include the Secret Celebrity Drag Race, the Hollisley Spectacular, and probably some other show that I'm forgetting, that number is, of course, higher than 3. The Reddit post that I found after googling Native American Drag Race Queens was posted 2 years ago, and it listed only 6 queens. But don't you worry, since then we have had more queens to add onto the list. Beth, Chalazon LaRue, Chaos, and also Kelly Mantle. Oh, that's it. That's 10 queens out of 220 that have been cast on Drag Race US and Drag Race Canada. Or to be more precise, 6 in 184 for Drag Race US and 4 in 36 for Drag Race Canada. If I did not list 1 or 2 queens just because I could not find them mentioned as Native American, there is no need to make your entire contribution to this discourse.
You forgot.
You can simply mention them and then maybe also mention some non-Drag Race drag artists that are of Native American descent. That would actually be helpful. You forgot comments are never helpful. In any case, I don't know about you, but when I look at these pie charts, I get genuinely sad and disappointed. Disappointed, but not surprised. It's Drag Race after all. So, let's talk about the mistreatment, misrepresentation, and lack of representation of Native American queens on Drag Race. Before we do get into the meat of the video, I want to just clarify some terminology first, because in my research I did see some terms used interchangeably when they shouldn't be. Indigenous means originating or occurring naturally in a particular place, or simply Native. When talking about indigenous peoples, you can talk about them on any continent. There's no need to get into semantics here and be all like,
well, technically, we all came from somewhere thousands of years ago.
Again, you're not helping the discourse. When talking about native or indigenous queens in this video, I'm focusing on the queens that have some Native American heritage. To be honest, I would just prefer to say American because they are the actual Americans. But since for many English speakers, American is citizen of the United States, though ironically, European, African, and Asian, etc. is a person from that continent. I do have to keep using the term Native American for that reason. First Nation is a term more often used in Canada when talking about their native peoples. Next, I'm only going to be focusing on US and Canada here, simply because, well, we don't have Drag Race Central American country yet. Also, when researching for this video, I found this post on the Drag Race Wikia that mentions Jojo Zaho and Inti in the Indigenous Queens of Drag Race category. I am mentioning this post for the sake of going over a fallacy some people may commit. Just because somebody is indigenous to some place doesn't mean they're of the same origin. Indigenous to the Americas is not the same as indigenous to Australia, for example. This list then should be filled by pretty much everybody in the Drag Race Philippines cast, most of the Drag Race UK casts, and so on. Like, you get my point. Basically, there are more indigenous queens than this, but their heritage is different, sometimes entire continent different, so they should not be grouped together. I would like to first present to you, or simply remind you of just how little representation there was of Native American peoples and cultures on Drag Race, and when there was some of it, It wasn't good. Let's start off with Stacy Layne Matthews, the, I believe, first queen of Native American descent to be on the show. At least she's the first one that mentioned it and talked about it. Yes, it took the show 3 seasons to cast a queen of Native American descent. And you cannot hit me back with,
Oh, it was a different time back then.
because up until season 3 we had Black Queen, Asian Queen, Filipino Queen, Hispanic American Queen, plus-size Queen, trans Queen, immigrant Queen experiences shared on the show. Why was the Native American experience last when they were there first? Stacy got to talk about her Native American identity very briefly on the show, and as she's also black, you can imagine that the latter part of her identity was the most showcased. I'm not even joking. The only time Stacy triumphed on the show was after winning Snatch Game, in which she portrayed Monique, a black woman. I found this 200-page thesis by Charlotte Theresa Helk, I'm gonna say, titled I'm a Mountain Biking Vampire Witch from the Future, Queer Decolonial Killjoys in Queer Studies and Politics. There's a section of this thesis titled Queer Indigeneity and Indian Simulations on RuPaul's Drag Race that talks about the very topic we're covering here. Helk cites Strings and Buey's work called She's Not Acting, She Is, the conflict between racial and gender realness in RuPaul's Drag Race, where they write about Stacy saying this. She reveals after several episodes that she's Native American, but curiously enough, her Southern credentials, skin color, and weight mark her black by association. Therefore, Stacy manages to excel when she performs 2 prominent stereotypes of black femininity, Mammy and Sapphire. End of quote. Stacy is not allowed to represent the Native American side of her. Ironically though, and how Helk points out, quote, performing indigeneity has been allowed on the show, but only in what Gerald Wisner terms as the Indian, a simulation. The absence of natives. The Indian transposes the real, and the simulation of the real has no referent, memories, or native stories. For instance, on the 9th episode of Season 3, titled Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Style, contestants engage in America-related competitions. For their main challenge, announced by RuPaul adorned in a cowboy-inspired outfit, the queens are asked to create a 1-minute message for the troops. For the main stage, RuPaul instructs the queens to dress in their most patriotic outfits. There, Indonesian-American contestant Raja dresses in full red-face, a Plains-inspired headdress, turquoise, and buckskin and leather short bikini. Raja's look is well received by the judges, who cry out, "How?" and "Navajo" as she walks down the runway. End of quote. Ironically, RuPaul later asks, can you get more American than Native American? A question that, in hindsight, is ironic and low-key horrifying. The show has actually had the American theme used in a couple of seasons. The top 4 of season 10 added their verses onto RuPaul's song American that proudly proclaims that she's an American, red, white, and blue. She's an American, just like you too. Not a single person in that top 4 or behind the song American is of Native American descent. With Stacy, the Native American cultures were ignored, with Raja tokenized, and in season 10 they were low-key went up against with the red, white, and blue Murica rhetoric. Yes, I know that the song is supposed to represent that even though these people are all queer, they're citizens of the United States. What? Next time this theme was used was for the promo of season 12. Again, a red, white, and blue. And again, not a Native American in sight. Then on All-Star 6, we watched 3 white queens and 1 black queen proclaim, "This is our country," in another nod to the United States. Again, not a Native American in sight. Trixie Mattel is the second queen in the Drag Race history to come on the show and talk about the fact that she is, well, Native American. Even though most of her presentation in drag is, for the lack of a better term, a white character, which obviously does not erase Trixie's heritage. Helk points out that the mistreatment that Trixie received on the show is related to her identity and presentation. Now, I don't fully agree with that. Trixie was disposed of twice in the season, but it was for the sake of saving Pearl, the queen with the strongest fabricated storyline of the season that the show was also trying to push. I don't think that this had to do with her Native American heritage, because that was not the focus of her character at all. However, it does not help the show that in season 7 they try to heavily push younger, white or white passing or presenting queens while villainizing, well, everybody else. Furthermore, the show and WoW Presents in general does tend to try to sweep Trixie's identity under the rug, which Helk points out in her work. However, then Trixie of the show gets a massive fan base, which is partially a result of the way that she was mistreated on Drag Race, starts releasing her country music, and becomes massively popular. One of the most popular drag queens of the show, and I would say the most popular now. Basically, Trixie bought into the American dream and capitalism and then became the second queen and so far the last queen cast on an All-Star season and the only Native American All-Stars winner. It's a little telling that Trixie's promo picture for All-Stars 3 is her in a cowboy-inspired look. However, Trixie was not the only Native American queen that was disposed of on the main Drag Race franchise. Shuga Cain also comes to mind. I say comes to mind as if there are more queens to choose from. But yeah, Shuga Cain, she was mostly viewed as Latino or Hispano-American on the show. But again, she also has some Native American ancestry. Shuga presented a look in the 3rd episode of the season for the Fringe runway that was Native American inspired. This is the closest we ever got to seeing proper representation of Native American cultures on the show. Isn't that sad? In 13 years of the show, so many seasons and Lord knows how many looks, this is the only one. However, Shuga got vague appraisal for her look because the producers and the judges are so out of touch with Native American cultures that I don't even want to touch that subject. Let's hear what the judges had to say about Shuga's look.
All right, Shuga Cain.
The look tonight. I love that you are showing who you are.
Well, Shuga Cain, yo soy cubano. I love that you're Apache and Latina. It's so unique.
That's it. Those are all of her critiques regarding her look. Every other queen got positive or negative critiques about their looks on that stage. And Shuga Cain got, "You're Native American," and that's great. Are you fucking kidding me? Maybe she was given actual critiques, but we were not shown any. However, the highest praise Shuga ever got for her looks on the runway came after the Snatch Game episode, when she wore this deep purple flamenco-inspired look. The judges knew what it was, they knew how to compliment it. Now, they could have done the same for the first look. Sure, you may say that they did not know the cultural significance or reference of her look. That's the moment when she tells us about it, educates us. Shuga was later disposed of in the season's top 7 episode when the judges had to pull negative critiques out of their asses to put her in the bottom 2 and then eliminate her. Literally for no reason. It came out of nowhere. There was no story in the episode to indicate that she was going to go home, nor was she treated like the other contestants were. The edit tried so hard to make it seem like Shuga did horribly in her team and thus deserved to be in the bottom 2, when every single person from the second group was worse than her. Sure, she may not have had the best runway presentation, but this wasn't a design challenge episode. Furthermore, Akiria, who wasn't even wearing a caftan, which was the runway's theme, was not in the bottom 2. So the same rules of your runway sucked did not apply to her. Shuga was sacrificed for the sake of keeping every queen from the other group. Evie, who was good TV and an outsider against the main group of Akiria, Brooke, Silky, and Vanjie, that the show wanted to see in the finale. Akiria, the shit stirrer of the season, who, once you watch Untucked, you can see is the instigator of Raja going off on the production, which got her eliminated, which in turn exposed the production trying to push Plastique towards the crown, which got her eliminated. Silky, who was prepped to be the show's first big girl winner, but the show soured on that idea after seeing her in the top 6 episodes lip sync. And Vanjie, who was just kept there for the storyline of her and Brooke, and their inevitable bottom 2 lip sync before the finale. Basically, Shuga Cain, a Native American and Hispano-American queen in the eyes of Drag Race's producers, was seen as just a filler queen. There were other instances when we saw Native American, let's say, inspired looks on the runway or in the maxi challenges. Of course, first we have to talk briefly about Alexis Michelle's look in Season 9's Gayest Ball Ever. In that challenge, the queens had to make a look inspired by one of the characters from The Village People. Alexis Michelle was tasked in making a Native American inspired look. While watching the episode, you get the impression that Alexis, Rue, and everybody in the building knows that it's a bad idea to do that. Basically, Alexis was screwed because of the ignorance of other people. In Season 10's Cher the Rusical, Monet Exchange got the task of doing Cher with a Native American inspired headdress on, doing a song about cultural appropriation. But do you guys get it? It's funny because they're aware that it's bad.
Oh my god, it's satire.
No, it's not. It's not satire. It's nowhere near clever, interesting, or impactful enough to be satire. And that's pretty much it. Those are pretty much all of the instances of Native American representation on Drag Race. US seasons, at least. They are a little better with it when it comes to Canada's Drag Race, given that they give their Native American queens actual representation, but sometimes in the form of tokenism. I'm not going to talk about that here because I'm going to talk about it in the next section of the video. For this video, I asked my viewers that are of Native American descent to contact me, because I wanted to hear their take on the subject of the video. Obviously, I can give you the close to objective presentation of how Native American peoples have been represented on the show. Too long, don't read version, almost not at all. But I also wanted to include first person, in a way, takes on these subjects. On the screen now, you can see the list of people that answered the questions I had for them with their ethnicities if they chose to share them, of course. I'm not going to read out every single response, but only the highlights. The first question they had to answer was simply, without Googling, can you name Native American queens that have competed on Drag Race? From the 10 queens that I listed in the first part of the video, nobody mentioned Evie Oddly, Kelly Mantle, or Adore Delano. To be honest, I wouldn't have known they were of Native American descent either had I not researched for the video. Xander mentioned Jojo Zaho, which is why I had to have that little terminology section. Indigenous should not be used as a synonym for Native American, and Indigenous Australian is not the same as Indigenous American. Malva mentioned Inti as well, which, yes, she's Native American, but in this video we're only focusing on the North American English-speaking franchises. Malva also said, and I quote, I know Envy Peru did something inspired by Inca aesthetics on Holland Season 1, but I'm not sure if she's ever claimed to be Native or of Indigenous descent. End of quote. I couldn't find that she ever mentioned it either, but given that she's Peruvian, it is possible that she has some Native American ancestry. However, again, irrelevant for this video. Basically, almost everybody that answered was able to mention a couple of queens. Jared was the only one that answered to this question with a simple no. The second question asks, how do you feel about Drag Race's representation and inclusion of Native American queens and cultures? Pretty much everybody pointed out that there's basically no representation of either the Native American peoples or their cultures. As Melanie pointed out, we barely ever get any appreciation for the cultures, as I have just mentioned in the first part of the video. And then also, quote, we have never seen the same level of conversation about what it is to be queer Native American the way we have gotten glimpses of queer Black, queer Asian, etc. And it's just another way North America pretends we don't exist. We're a very out of sight, out of mind group. Poke us away on a reserve and no one has to hear us. End of quote. There is definitely a case to be made with geographical and cultural isolation that Native American peoples are somewhat forced to live in. As Malva said, quote, I'm sure that there are a ton of them that are auditioning and never get through the filters because they don't fit any type that they want to cast. End of quote. Now let's put a pin on this for a second. If you have seen any of my previous Drag Race analysis videos, or if you just understand how reality TV works, you know that pretty much every single contestant is boiled down to maybe 2 or 3 descriptors. The show does this so that they can make it easier on themselves to construct and edit narratives. If you're going onto the show with this in mind, you can use it to your advantage, as some queens have done, while on the other hand, and sadly is the case with most popular queens of the show, they constantly market themselves with those 2 or 3 descriptors. Obviously, branding here is involved too, so it gets a little more complicated, but it can get very unethical once things that we cannot control, like sex, sexuality, gender, race, ethnicity, etc. come into play. In an interview that I found, Ilona Verley was asked, what is it like to have who you are as a person framed as a storyline on a TV show? And Ilona said that she went onto the show knowing about the archetypes and thus being very vocal about her ethnicity. However, she was not able to also talk about the fact that she was trans as well. For the producers, Ilona was the Native American queen, and that's it. So when Ilona has a not-so-stellar showing on the season, and given that the bulk of her storyline is regarding her ethnicity, subconsciously the fans can relate the two together. They shouldn't, but we know that they do. Another example of this is Evie Oddly. Evie is black, or, African American, and Native American. Her main storyline in the season was not related to either of the two. You may say, well, that's a good thing. And yeah, it is. It definitely is. But her underdog storyline was often put in this frame of the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome type 3 that she has, even though Evie was constantly fighting that narrative that the edit tried to give her. And then on season 14, we had Willow Pill, who has cystinosis, and Diabetes, who, if you couldn't tell from her drag name, has diabetes. Only Willow was able to have her condition be explained, shown how it affected her life in a negative way, and how she had to live every day with it. However, Diabetes talked about her life with diabetes once, maybe? Basically, the show could only have one queen on the season be remembered for having something. It's like tokenism at its worst. There is also often talk on if the only kind of representation a group gets is tokenism, is no representation better than that kind of presentation? Well, when it comes to the Native American queens, we haven't even reached the stage of constant tokenism. As Kat said, quote, US Drag Race seems to only use Native imagery if it applies to a category/challenge. End quote. Next question was, in comparison to other races and or ethnicities, do you think Native American queens are given the same treatment? The answers here vary, but the middle ground that I could find was that the answer is a clear no. They're usually in the middle, completely forgotten, but not villainized like the Hispanic or in general foreign queens, for example. Malva finds that they're often held up to Eurocentric beauty standards, but that they're also at the same time expected to tokenize their identities and cultural backgrounds. Kat points out, at least for Canada's Drag Race, where we've really only seen the Native American trope, quote, the queens are often given storylines that only focus on their ethnicity rather than their personalities or drag styles. Basically, they're dehumanized and just boiled down to that one label. Melanie gave a really good answer to this, and she said, quote, we have seen a really important conversation start around what it was like for Monet to be black and queer, and the highest form of gay, a drag queen. We've seen Asian queens like Yuhua talk about the culture of ignoring things one finds unpalatable in some Asian cultures. We have heard how religion has been both a curse and a blessing for queens. We don't get to hear what it was like for the only effeminate kid in a small town where their family is probably dealing with the rampant addiction and mental health crises that are ravaging the North American native peoples from the Atlantic to the Pacific. We don't get to hear someone like Ilona Verley talk about how the murdered and missing indigenous women and children and two-spirit people are a very serious issue for the queer community. We aren't an afterthought. We aren't a thought. We aren't even a End of quote. Next, I asked, knowing in general how North American countries operate when it comes to Native American peoples, do you think Drag Race is a good representation of that? Meaning, does the show treat Native American queens/cultures the same way that the systems in North American countries do? Most of the answers here are that yes, how systems treat Native American queens is how Drag Race does it. Jared gave his reasoning behind this by saying, quote, I think that Native American culture is not mainstream in North American countries, and it's not highlighted on Drag Race. End of quote. This is a very good point of view because in the last couple of years, and as Malva said, Canada has had this attitude of, quote, we know we fucked up and we recognize we are racist, but what can we do about it? They're not very active in reparations or consolidation of a future that abolishes it. They just acknowledge it. And the last season of Canada was very much like that. We acknowledge that there are some Indigenous queens, and they kind of made this story about chaos, trying to come to terms with her Metis identity and showing her proudness about being Indigenous, even if her skin or her cultural and social contexts are not super high on Indigenous pride, as if they were trying to push the narrative that all Indigenous people should not be afraid to tell people they're Indigenous, but at the same time, when they solved this storyline, they just moved on and eliminated her. End of quote. In the US, however, the attitude is more out of sight, out of mind. Mark my words, once the issues of the Native American people become mainstream in the US, then we will magically see more Native American queens on the show, tokenized to hell and back. However, the skeptic in me doubts the US will ever actually have a moment like this, at least not anytime soon. So really, the only way this can start is if we start a conversation about it. I tried getting in touch with some of the queens mentioned before, but sadly got no response. Now, I don't know what the reason behind it is. They probably did not even see the messages and emails, but I hope it's not fear of speaking out against the show, because Lord knows there are too many sycophants amongst the Rue girls. However, I also want to highlight Chase's response to this question, which took a different route. He said, and I quote, "Definitely not. As Native Americans get horrible treatment in the US, I personally have not experienced it, as where I live, our school mascot is an actual Indian. But my ancestors did have to go through all the cruelty and hardships that Native Americans faced. On the show, they don't acknowledge them as much, so I guess it's better to ignore than act negatively." End of quote. However, as you can see, the destination is still the same. The destination being the lack of representation of Native American queens. The fifth question was more of a personal one. Do you, as a person of Native American descent, see yourself properly represented on Drag Race? Some of the answers were straight up no's, saying that their cultures are more often than not just presented as fashion and nothing else. Xander said he felt represented by Shalazan, while Kat mentioned Shalazan and Lona, and Melanie mentioned chaos. Malva adds that they would stray away from showing their cultural heritage if they were ever on Drag Race. So there is a case to be made that with tokenism and obviously the lack of representation, there is a lack of encouragement to try to properly represent yourself, which sadly is quite understandable, because that can also often lead to misrepresentation. Next question is something I hinted to in the first couple of seconds of this video, and why I had to have that whole terminology section. Do you think that there is hypocrisy in the show using the gimmick of America to represent inclusivity? Pretty much everybody pointed out the fact that America being used as a term that represents inclusivity is, well, a lie. Something that Drag Race tends to preach often is, we're all different, that's what makes us beautiful. In regards to this, Malva says, and I quote, "The thing with Native Americans is, if they accept that we exist as a culturally diverse and distinctive people, they kinda admit that America is not that illusion of the coming together of race, gender, sexuality, etc. that they wanted to portray because it has been brought up or created upon the mistreatment of natives, the stolen land and the backs of immigrants and slaves. We are all a product of colonization in the Western world, and if you want to opt out of Western sensibilities, you get silenced. America is inclusive to what they consider inclusive. They don't consider living outside the established boundaries of colonial powers." End of quote. Now, this is a great way to put it. Basically, as much as the US and Drag Race as an extension of that, they are only talking about certain people. I recently watched a video titled "Disney Gets Stronger the More You Hate It," and parallels between Disney and Drag Race as a franchise, and then the way they each warp reality in their fans' minds, are uncanny. But something that really caught my attention is the channel's praise of the Marvel universe's, as they said, group of diverse women. Now, I'm gonna let you look at this screenshot. This is diverse, sure, but is it as diverse as the United States or as the world? Nope. But this is what inclusivity is. That's what we're being sold. So while researching this video, I got to thinking, is there a specific cultural gap between Native American cultures and the queer/neoliberal cultures in the United States that maybe by design make it hard for Native American people to take part in the latter cultures? So that was the next question. First, I want to read you Melanie's response, which I found really powerful. Quote, "There is a massive gap. The main issue is that so many of our people are isolated geographically. We were put on reserves and left there with nothing but trauma for company, and the result has been the addiction and mental health epidemic in our communities. Small towns, far away from any place with any sort of queer culture, makes it difficult at times for our youth to find their true selves. Native American ideas about queerness are a strange jumble right now. Traditionally, it was an entirely normal part of the community, as it should be. But when the government decided that we had to be assimilated, they took children from their homes and raised them in residential schools, where the Christian faith and its beliefs replaced centuries of culture. We have a mix of people who are trying to get back to our roots, and people who have had the gay is bad, you'll go to hell mentality drilled into them so forcefully that they have lost our relationship with queerness, along with things like our languages, our ways of life, our songs. When you combine this with the fact that a Native person is more likely to be socioeconomically disadvantaged, more likely to have been in the foster care system, more likely to deal with mental health issues, addiction, and has been surrounded by this, it doesn't give the opportunity for someone to explore art like drag. Every day you use all you have just to remain alive." End of quote. Now, I'm not going to say that organized religion is the root of all evil, I'm just gonna hint at it. Xander also expanded on this by saying, quote, "A lot of Indigenous and First Nations places already had their own terms and ideology on sexuality and gender, and queer people often try to take that. For example, the amount of non-Indigenous people calling themselves Two-Spirit." End of quote. However, obviously, like with any culture, as Kat said, quote, "Some natives come from conservative backgrounds and traditional values, whereas others are more liberal in the sense of being queer-friendly/spiritual." End of quote. So cultures that in themselves are what we would nowadays call queer-friendly are less present in queer spaces and drag race than other cultures that are actively anti-queer but that come from Europe, Asia, or Africa. Interesting. And y'all are doing this on the former's land. Got it. The gap can also explain the lack of spaces for Native Americans in queer spaces, those including drag race. Intersectionality and inclusivity and diversity, my ass. I'm sorry, I know I'm supposed to try to stay objective here, but why do we support the show? Malva pointed out that drag race has become watered down in a way, trying to become family-friendly and capitalism-oriented. They continue by saying, quote, "Most queer spaces in the US have become somewhat consumeristic and therefore are catering to the majority, and that means the white idea of the US, and therefore the colonized US and the queerness of Native people is erased. Often, Indigenous people and traditions are treated as less advanced, like our traditions and worldviews are not culturally different, they are culturally regressive, as if they were a thing of the past and we were not alive today." End of quote. Ooh, this sentiment gets me heated. I don't like this idea that for one, modern equals good, and that, like Malva said, culturally different means culturally regressive. I don't know, to me it's just ludicrous that there are people that don't want to see something that's of a different culture, especially if it's so different to their own. If people don't have humanity in them, isn't there at least a tad bit of curiosity? But we're getting a little off topic. Let's continue on to the next question. I asked, how do you think Drag Race, as the leading queer show in the US, can help make queer spaces more inclusive for Native American people? Drag Race can help make queer spaces more inclusive for Native Americans by just allowing us the same opportunities. End of quote. I know, shocking. Allow Native American people to talk about their experiences, their traumas, the effects of the constant negligence the country they live in. Give us more queens that talk about their experiences, that can educate people that have never been exposed to Native American cultures in our everyday lives. They exist, Drag Race, and it's a shame that you pretend that you don't see them, because it's not popular to see them now or even look at them. Of course, the work isn't just on Drag Race. It's on the queer community, our allies, the United States, and basically anybody with even an ounce of humanity in them. Will this video change anything? No. But I do hope it at least starts conversation. One tweet, one Instagram or Reddit post, one TikTok or whatever you kids use about this can help. Lastly, I asked everyone their final thoughts on the subject of this video, and we're going to go over all of them. First, Chase said this, quote, I just think that there isn't any major mistreatment. There just needs to be more focus on us, as I bet the average viewer could not even name one queen, which is disappointing. I just want people to acknowledge we're here. Xander said, I just wish that would have more proper representation of indigenous people in RuPaul's Drag Race, as I feel like it could actually make a difference in how queer people perceive us. Melanie said, It's really disappointing, but not surprising. Native Americans are very absent from the vast majority of mainstream entertainment. I think because of drag's power as an art to lift people up, to foster bonds and community, and the incredible danger our people are in from being murdered and the police saying, well, they probably just ran off, to battling addiction, to a million other wolves snapping at our heels, it is particularly important to be welcoming and make us know we're seen. Jared said, My final thoughts on the whole ordeal are that Drag Race needs to have more Native American representation as well as embracive Native American culture. Kat said this. The US has an issue with generations of people being told they have Native ancestry when they either don't or it's so far removed that they have no cultural ties to it. Yet, people still want to claim they are part of the culture without really knowing their family history, let alone Native history / current issues. It's fine to appreciate the culture and support it. But without any proof of Native ancestry, it's odd to claim another heritage as your own when you don't face the same issue / discrimination. It may not be intentional, but doing this only takes away from Native people by not letting them embrace their culture and speak for themselves, without it being the only storyline given to Native queens. And lastly, Malva said this. Overall, it's not perfect. It never will be perfect, because there's no such thing, especially with a show that caters to such a large audience and that people have put an expectation for it to be totally politically correct in the forefront of wholeness, and more. I believe most of the things that have bothered me are not even things that are super avoidable, and it's never an, oh my god, they deliberately did this to belittle our cultures. It's always more of an, I'm disappointed this happened, but not surprised. And it's sad that I at least have been desensitized to expecting the worst for representation in a show that's this influential and important to me and many others. It is also very weird because I feel like Canada did a good job with representation on season 1, and then season 3 just fucked it up really badly. But in the US, I feel there has never been any effort whatsoever to make this an issue to talk about. There's little to no representation at all. I've been wanting to do this video for about 4 years now, but there was always a part of me that feared the backlash of maybe people thinking I'm going all white savior on them, or that I might make a mistake and get cancelled. However, after doing this for how many years? I realized that people that want you to get better and be educated will properly correct you and help you. People that are unsatisfied with their lives will find faults in anything you do and do the former. I did not want to have the Patreon section in the earlier parts of the video, so here, I'm giving a shout out to all of my supporters on Patreon. If you enjoy what I do here, you can join us on there, or you can like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.